Hi, my name is Misael from Adapt Lab, and today we will be installing our Vortech bracket on our 3UZ engine here. Now, our 3UZ engine is sitting inside of a SC400 attached to a ZF 6-speed transmission, and we're controlling it using a Mega Squirt. But overall, this bracket install is going to be similar between the 1UZ, 2UZ, 3UZ, VVTi, or non-vvti. But for this specific example, we're going to be using a 3UZ engine, and we're going to walk you through every single process of installing it, minus the disassembly of the front of the engine, because that one is going to be unique to the non-vvti and the vvti variation of engines. But basically, you're going to have to strip down the front of the engine about the same amount. All right, so now we are in the engine bay of our SC400. Again, the 3UZ does not belong in the SC400 chassis, but obviously it fits just like every other UZ engine. So all of this is going to be similar, whichever SC or Lexus chassis that you have this in, right? So as it pertains to the engine, as you can see, the cam covers here are off. This cover is off. There's a smaller plastic cover that's off, and then the fan bracket is off. Let me go ahead and grab this. You're going to have to completely remove this bracket off, because we're going to have to get to a certain bolt stud situation that Toyota has. So as you can see, this is the bolt in question that you actually have to take off, and this sits behind the fan bracket like this. So we need to get this out, because we will be replacing it with a stud. The other thing to note is that this is the LS400 fan bracket, and you have to run this to use this supercharger bracket. On some of the SC400 or UZ engines, but mostly SC400 engines, they ended up having a hydraulic setup to where this is a whole pump and it has a solenoid that sticks out right here, and that's going to be in the way of attaching the bracket. So if you have a hydraulic fan setup and a hydraulic pump, that needs to be removed, and you need to get this LS400 bracket. Some of the 3UZ or VVTi engines already have this bracket, and they already have a pulley, so that's completely fine. You don't have to do that. But regardless, you're still going to have to remove it from the engine so that way the bracket can mount. All right, so one thing I want to clarify, there have been some supercharger brackets in the past that have been available. There are some that are still available, but they have certain issues. If we zoom in into this fan bracket here, there have been some very serious cuts into this fan bracket, and that's because of the other brackets that have been available, like the fish bracket, or there have been some ProCharger brackets on the market that one is no longer available. But one of the main issues is that supercharger bracket has to it's going to interfere here, so you have to end up cutting this LS400 fan bracket so that way the supercharger bracket can actually come in and bolt here. But on our bracket, you do not have to make any cuts or any adjustments to the LS400 fan bracket. All right, so this is the starting point that you want to be at. This cam cover off, this cam cover off. There's a plastic cover here that has to come off, and the AC compressor has to be taken out. So right here, there's supposed to be a stud. We've already taken that out. You can take out the stud while the fan bracket is still on. However, you're gonna have to remove the fan bracket regardless because of this stud right here. And if you want to zoom in right here, this stud needs to come out because it has a nut embedded in it, and the only way to get this completely out is you have to remove the fan bracket. So whatever you need to remove the fan bracket, that's what needs to come out. And then once that is removed, there is a stud right here that is going to need to be inserted. You'll find that in your kit, and you're gonna start threading it in, and you will need two 12mm wrenches, and then you're gonna put two nuts on here. When we assemble the kit, it will have a spacer, a stud, and then two nuts. That's how you'll be able to identify it. It'll actually come with one of these spacers, but you won't need it right now, but don't lose it, please, because you will need it for alignment. So I'm gonna tighten up these two nuts together so that way I can make sure I drive the stud into the block. You just need it snug. You don't need it really, really tight. We're not trying to break any components here. And then I'm going to loosen it. Loosen one nut. Take it off. And then this nut here, we're going to reverse it. And then we're going to tighten the back, and that will be how it ends up sitting. And yes, it is supposed to sit that far out from the engine. You'll see why later in the video. But let's get this all tightened down. And again, just snug will be fine. And then let's get to the next step. Okay, so the next step, you're going to have to get your fan bracket. Make sure your pulley is already on. And then we will be putting this fan bracket on right now. So we're going to find that stud that we just put on, and it's going to align up to this hole here. And then you're going to, there's a few dowel pins right here. You're going to have to align it. There's one over here. There's also another one on the other side. Make sure it's flush. It says flush to the engine. Okay. Make sure you're all the way down. And for now, remember that spacer that I said we don't want to lose? I like to just do this. I'm going to put this here. This is where it belongs. We're not going to fully tighten this right now. I just want to leave it there so I don't lose it. But that's basically where it's going to go. The bracket is going to end up going here and in between. But if you're trying to put the covers back on to the engine, because now at this point, there's a plastic cover here and the other cam cover here that you could put back on. Like I said, I just want to put this here as just to save it so I know where it goes. So for right now, if you want to pause and put this cover on and this cover on, go ahead and do that. But I'm going to continue with the install. All right, so at this point, I'm going to assume that you have the covers on this side of the engine and then your fan bracket on. But I want to talk about the cam cover on the driver's side or the left side of the engine. Now, on the VVTIs, you do have a interference issue with the supercharger pulley that ends up coming to the side of the cam cover. So you can either cut a relief, cut a hole, make an opening so that way it won't touch. It's going to be right about this section. Or you could just run it without it. If you have a super small pulley, most likely you will not have this interference issue. But if you have a bigger pulley, like we're talking a 3.8 inch or 4 inch pulley, it will absolutely come into contact with this. Now, for the non-VVTI engines, the pulley, it's not coming in here on the cover, but it's coming in the front. So you're going to have to cut the plastic on the non-VVTI engines. Now, the plastic cover comes all the way over here to the front, and then there's another one here. And those two covers, the upper and the lower, will need to be cut on the non-VVTI engine in the front, so that way you can make clearance. Now, that's one compromise that we ended up having with this kit. We really don't think it's that much that you have to make a relief of, but you're gaining a very good supercharger position, and we wanted it really tight to the motor as well. So if anybody else who's swapping this this engine into a different chassis and you want the supercharger as low as possible with a good amount of belt wrap, this was one of the compromises we had to make, but we really don't think that that's a big compromise in our opinion. All right, so now we're going to concentrate on putting on the supercharger bracket. So right here are the bolt holes that you are going to put the bolts in. This is a M10 bolt, M10 bolt, M8 bolt. And let's flip this around, and I want to show you that the M10 bolts are going to get these spacers, but the M8 bolt will not get the spacer, okay? However, the stud that's on the engine is going to get a spacer, right? And make sure you remove the nut, because the nut is going to end up tightening down on the bracket. But this is the way it needs to be set up before you put it on. So this is a threaded hole here. Don't put this bolt right here. This bolt, this M8 bolt goes here. M10 bolt, spacer and spacer. So either way, let's get this on. So I kind of like to line up the holes a little bit with the bolts over here. And then I can basically push these forward, line it up with the stud over here, and then put it on. If the AC compressor was still on, you would not be able to do this. So make sure you completely loosen the bolts for the AC compressor and let it dangle as low as possible, so that way you can get this in a straight shot. And as you can see, no drama, no problems. And we're just going to be tightening the bolts here. Okay, and before I forget, I'm going to put this nut on the stud right there. Okay, and let's get this far as possible by hand. You definitely want to check to see if the threads on the block are okay. I usually like to go down as much as possible by hand, so that way I make sure that, you know, we're not going to cross thread or cause any damage to any bolts. But once it's mostly all the way there, we're going to end up getting, I like to use a wrench for this. Again, this is a long bolt. You don't want to make any mistakes. So I don't like to use any power tools or electric tools. That's just a personal thing. Okay, that's getting snug. That's getting snug. And we want to walk this down all together. All right, we are fastening the bolts right now and also the nut right here. But after you drive a little bit, I do recommend you come back and tighten these bolts again. This is all new hardware. This is all a new supercharger bracket. So over time, it may come loose because, like I said, you're tightening it once, it's heating up or whatnot. But I do always recommend that you come back and always check that your hardware is still there, number one, and still tight. For the guys who are not running AC, you will need this for the next step. So we have provided a dormant pulley, a proper shouldered bolt, and then the spacer for it, and this will all be packaged together. So if you want to come in. So right here above this M10 bolt is a threaded hole. You put the spacer right here and you put this right there, and that's where it will live. So obviously I have not put the AC compressor up. If you put the AC compressor up, it's going to interfere. This is meant to only go on when the AC compressor is not on. But as you can see, when later on in the video, when we end up bolting up the AC compressor, how high it'll be, and it'll disrupt the path or the location of where this pulley is right here. So, but if you do have an AC compressor, you just bolt it up back to where it was, and then you'll be fine. But that's how that looks on the bracket. So the next step after we have the supercharger bracket tightened, we are going to be assembling our idlers. So you're going to need to look for the spacer that has a shoulder on it, very small and a very baby shoulder. And then these are going to be the idlers that we provide, and then this will be the bolt that you will be needing to get, right? So I am going to now place this here, and then also we're going to talk about all the different holes and cutouts that we have here on the bracket. But first, let's talk about these 4 threaded holes right here. So these are where the idlers go. This one I'm just going to put right here for now, just for showing you the install. But if you need to get more belt wrap on the supercharger pulley is going to be somewhere around here. Okay, so if you have a bigger pulley, I just put it in the middle, but you want to move the idler farther away from the supercharger, because obviously the supercharger pulley is going to take up more space. Now if you have a smaller pulley, like the supercharger that we have right now has a 2.87 inch pulley, we can actually step that a little bit closer up to here, but for right now we're just going to put it in the middle. If you don't have to go closer to the supercharger, I recommend you don't. If you have the right amount of belt wrap, which this kit already has a lot, and if you don't have any belt slip, I recommend you space it farther away first and then move it closer. All right, so next we're going to prepare our Vortech V3SI blower to put on the bracket. Now, the first thing you'll need to reach for is these studs. There are 5 that are provided. In this case, we're only going to end up using 4. But I'm going to show you where they go. So these, again, if this is the orientation, the pulley is, to me, I'm looking at the back side, it's going to go one here, one here, one here, and one here. And the last one would be here. Again, that's if you are using it. But if you don't need it, then you don't use it. Just keep it just in case, because, you never know what happens to one of these threads or the spacers or whatnot. Any of the extra components, you may end up needing them later, depending on if something ends up going wrong, or you end up accidentally damaging some of the components that were provided for you. Okay, so now that we have our studs on the supercharger, the way this is going to go, we have these long spacers right here. They're going to go here and here. However, on this stud right here, which is right underneath the supercharger, that's going to be at the bottom, you're going to put this spacer. It's about 60 millimeters, somewhere around there, and it's actually going to be trapping a idler right here. Now, all of this has been precision machined together to be the exact same height, but this idler is always going to stay here no matter what. It is not going to move. So that's where you're going to end up putting that there. And also, I just wanted to show you guys something really quick. So as I said, the other extra bolts, when it came to tightening the supercharger, these, let me see, nope, this is the one right here. It's going to go here, and if you want to go through the bracket and tighten it up there, that's basically how it's going to look again. But you can only use 2 of these, or depending if you have a Vortech supercharger with ears meaning these holes are sticking out a little bit more right there, you'll only be able to use 1. But any supercharger unit without ears, you'll be able to use both bolts. Again, if you need to, this is an extra. Again, we're not trying to assume exactly what you're doing or how hard you're pushing the supercharger. They're just there to just be an added benefit to you. So either way, now our supercharger is basically prepped. I put these in hand tight. They don't need to be, you don't need to put nuts on them and then tighten them down like really tight. You don't need to do that. But just make sure that you have the right number of nuts. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, there's 5 here. You should only need 4. Don't put these on yet, because obviously these studs need to slide through the bracket, and then you can tighten it down on the back side. Now, I left enough stud to go through the bracket, and then you can let go and the supercharger can hang. So that way it gives you a chance to actually be hands-free and then put the nuts on the backside. So you don't have to worry about kind of like juggling with the hardware in your hand and then putting the supercharger there and then doing all that stuff. No, so I left enough stud length so that way you could just put it in and then tighten the nuts from the back. Okay, so now we're going to put the supercharger on our engine. One of the ways I like to put it on is to actually put the serpentine belt on the supercharger and then put the supercharger on. However, I'm going to just put the supercharger on and then figure out the pulley, the supercharger on the pulley a little bit behind, a little bit later. But either way, let's go in. Let's put this in here. And basically this stud right here is going to go to this hole, so start aligning it there. And then it should be able to slide in. And with the 6 rib, you should be able to get the belt from behind. I usually, like I said, I like to sometimes put the belt on with the supercharger. But in this instant, we are going to be putting the belt on while the supercharger is on. So the supercharger is loose, so you don't want to rock this around, because if you do, you may end up knocking off the supercharger, and we don't want that. So either way. So let me bring the belt in here. All right, so the next step we're going to do, we're actually going to put the hardware on the studs now. So that way we can tighten up the supercharger. Again, we kind of semi-wrapped our belt just to not get in the way of any other processes. But there's enough stud behind to where you can comfortably let the Vortech dangle on the bracket, but still be able to easily get the nut on the stud. So, and that's what we're going to do. And now these nuts are 14 millimeters. So the best way to tighten them up will obviously be a 14 millimeter rich. And that's what we're going to do. Now, as I said earlier in the video, all of this is new hardware. All of these spacers are brand new. All of these studs, all the nuts are brand new. I mean, the brackets are brand new. So as you go using this kit on your car with the supercharger, make sure you go back and always make sure that the hardware is properly tightened up, because we don't want to lose any hardware and then end up having a catastrophic failure. Okay, obviously there's going to be a point where you don't have to chase it no more, but with new hardware, new bolts, new nuts, you always need to make sure that it stays tight and properly fastened. But I'm going to go ahead and get this all tightened down, and then we will go on to the next step. Okay, so now we are going to install what is called the number 2 idler from Toyota on this 3UZ engine. So you're going to grab the Norman pulley that is provided for you. You have to use this one for this kit, okay? And then there is a OEM washer, kind of like a bearing guard on the original one. You're going to actually reuse this, and you're also going to end up reusing the original bolt for the idler, okay? So let's put this together. You got your pulley, you got your guard, you got your bolt. Simple. And now we will be walking over to install right here. Make sure that there is no wobble when you install this. Sometimes the bearing guard or the little washer that's right here, it ends up getting a little bit flat, and there's like a nice thin line between it bottoming out and not. So you got to make sure that you still get that all the way flush and flat. Okay. And as you can see, I can't move the pulley at all back and forth. Make sure you give it a nice wiggle. We're going to tighten it a little bit. Okay, that's good. And then we're on. All right, so now we're going to be putting the belt onto the engine. And as you can see down here, we already have it roughly set up. I just wanted to do this really quick. You know, there's nothing glamorous about showing you this. But basically, I wanted to discuss a little bit about the pulley size versus the belt size. So the pulley size that we have right here on this specific example is going to be a 2.87-inch pulley, obviously 6-rip. And the belt that we have here, the manufacturer says is a 105-inch belt. However, we are finding that a 104 or a 104.5-inch belt is going to be a little bit more optimal. And I'm going to end up showing you on the tensioner here how you can tell if you need a slightly shorter belt or slightly longer belt. But either way, let's go ahead and finish putting the belt onto the engine. So if you need to know the belt path, please refer to your service manual. But basically, I'm going to point out here, the idler, the belt is going to go from the OEM idler, and it's going to go to the idler right here to the supercharger. It's going to wrap around, going to touch the trapped idler that is down here in this section, then wrap around the AC or your AC delete pulley, and then continue on as normal. So it's really not too hard to figure out. But we're going to end up getting our wrench or ratchet with our 14 millimeter. I'm going to end up going towards the left, or the pulley is going to go to the left. I'm going to pull up on it and then let go, and the belt is on. But however, I want to use this as an example, right? Again, 2.87-inch pulley, and this is a 105-inch belt. And this shows a perfect example of where we actually need a slightly smaller belt. There's these 3 little marks right here. You usually want to stay within here. And as you can see, there's a little section right here that's pointing into this vacant spot between this mark and that mark. Right there, you're kind of almost at the end of the tension of the tensioner. So I'm using this as an example as to what you should expect to see if you have a belt that's slightly too long, because obviously we don't want any belt slip. But this mark needs to be over here. So if we took off 1/2 inch off the belt, maybe 3/4 inch off the belt, I mean, different manufacturers will be different. You'll end up getting this into the correct spot. So that's where you want it to be. But as of right now, the belt is on. Everything is all together. If you have a 1UZ non-vvti and you're still using the distributors, unfortunately, there is a OEM bracket that holds the ignition coil that is going to interfere with the supercharger bracket, especially if you are a 2nd generation engine, which is 95, 96, 97, 2nd generation non-vvti. So what we ended up doing is, this is something that's going to be optional on the website. This right here is one of the prototype brackets that we made. So there's going to be 2 holes that we end up drilling and tapping here, specifically in this location. Again, it's going to be a drop-down menu. So if you have the OEM ignition coil, you're going to be using this bracket here. I have pre-assembled it just to show you quickly how it ends up going on. And then if you have upgraded your 1UZ engine on your SC400 or LS400 to the MSD coil, we also made a kit to where you just end up buying this bracket, and then your already existing product would just go into this like this and then bolt in there. So if you're one of those people that have invested in our MSD ignition coil kits, you don't have to lose the proper mounting that we ended up making for that kit. So let me just show you. You can use the OEM hardware for the OEM ignition coil if that's what you're gonna be running. Obviously, like again, the brackets are completely different, so you have to select this in a drop down menu. The holes are gonna be the same, but these brackets are gonna be different, right? So these are Phillips head screws, and I just mounted two just for an example, but it's gonna be real simple. You get the hardware that is provided when you purchase this, and I'm gonna turn this around here shortly. Right there. And I believe this is going to be a 3mm Allen. So it's just going to be real simple. Once you attach the ignition coil to the bracket, then you are going to end up screwing the bracket into it. So this does not have any interference issue with the block, and it doesn't have any interference issue with the valve covers or whatnot. So the way it's going to end up looking is like this, and it's going to be perfectly like OEM. So if you have a second generation engine, again, 95, 96, 97, you'll notice that the orientation of the ignition coil is basically going to be the same as if you had a 90 to 94 engine. So it's basically copying the orientation, but it's going to end up mounting on the bracket. So the good thing is, if you have like the harness is coming through here, you don't have to make any pigtails, you don't have to do any jumping. The wires will reach, and that's including the spark plug wire as well. All right, so now we have our SC400 running with our 3UZ engine and the Vortech B3 SI blower. This car was already running a prototype for a few months now, so the intercooler and all the piping was already there. We just hooked it up. So let's hear how it sounds. I don't know, sounds pretty good to me, but I appreciate you guys' support, and I appreciate you guys watching this install video. Hopefully you had a great install and you're ready to have fun with our kit. You guys take it easy, and thank you again for supporting Adapt Lab.